Let's just start from the top here. Welcome to the Big Brown Gadfly, where we give a hard time to people who need to be given a hard time. This is Bobby Lopez, your host, and I have special guest on, Rachel Alexander. And this episode is about stopping the coup. We've got to stop the coup. Is there a coup going on, Rachel?
Yeah, of course. This is more election fraud than we've ever seen in our lifetime in any presidential election. This is like nothing I could have ever envisioned. You know, I did my own election prediction, which was Trump would have modestly won, and I did not, maybe naively, calculate in the depth of election fraud, but it is just astonishing.
Yeah, I called it. I said that it didn't matter how much of an appeal we were making to voters. And I knew that the polls were totally fake. That was obvious. But I knew it was not going to make a difference because ultimately they were going to do what they always do, which is they were going to just control how the ballots were counted and come up with a bunch of fake ballots at the last minute. That's what they always do. So I just want to start out by saying, you know, where are Rachel and I coming from with this? We don't believe any of the Democrats' rationale for why they need to find boxes of ballots at 4:00 in the morning. We're past that. We're not going to make arguments about that. The question is, what are our options now going forward? Maybe Rachel doesn't go with me all the way to this conclusion, but I think Trump won the election. I think if you look at what the vote counts were at a reasonable time when all of the polling stations were closed, that reflects what his vote was. There was no reason, with all of the discussion prior to the election about election integrity, there was no reason for any district in America to not have your vote count done by that night. I mean, Trump had already taken it to court in several different states to try to stop these districts from taking another extra week to discover other ballots, because Democrats have time and time again used that tactic. They pull out the provisional ballots late. There was a lot of discussion about this going into the election. There was no excuse. So in my mind, the tallies that were there by about 2:00 in the morning, my time, Central Time, with the exception of Alaska and Hawaii, that was the results of the election, and Trump won. That's my view of it. So given that was the situation, and we have to deal with all of these boxes of ballots, what are our legal remedies? First, we'll talk about that, Rachel. Legally, what does it seem to be that's available to Trump at this point?
Well, basically, he can challenge a lot of the things that have happened in court where, for example, in Pennsylvania, where they are counting ballots as accepted that were coming in too late. And so if, they can get those separated out, those can all be disqualified. And even if, Trump gets some left-wing, federal district court judge to decide that, he can appeal that all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. Okay,
so basically what you're telling me is what I have been thinking to myself, which is that we see on MSNBC or CNN or even Fox News, we see these tallies up there as if all of these states have been called and it's official. And what you're saying is that that's an illusion. These calls are not official, right? Because ultimately it's not official until the electors present these to Congress and Congress accepts them. So from where we are right now to that point where the electors deposit the vote counts in Congress, there are legal remedies because we can challenge these and we can basically, how does he plead? Because I'm not an attorney. Rachel's an attorney. How does this work? What would the pleading be? It would be like an injunction or a cease and desist order, or what does a lawyer do to try to intervene in a case like this?
I don't know necessarily off the top of my head which ones or which combination, but I'm guessing it's going to be a combination of a bunch of those. It's going to be called a complaint. It's going to be called, an emergency motion. It's going to have a couple of different aspects of it as to what they want. And from what I'm understanding, these challenges can go on, not only until, the electors have decided, but I heard the magical date is we can, keep filing complaints and litigate through like December 8th. And then there's something else that happens then, but we've got time to go. And look at Bush versus Gore,
Right. I remember that.
That went on for weeks. And so there's
Right.
no reason to hurry this. There's no reason to slow down, and there's no reason to say we shouldn't be doing it.
Right. I think that right now, so we have the legal remedy that there are things that the lawyers can plead, which would reflect, I mean, because ultimately each of these states, there's a Secretary of State. They're the ones that certify what the final vote count is. And that's the discharge of their public duties. And so Trump can go to the courts and to intervene, to place injunctions on them, to not allow them to basically post vote counts that are fraudulent or that have not been secured or certified. And the courts, what standards would the courts use to evaluate those pleadings? How would they decide in favor of Trump's lawyers? How would they decide against them? What would be the basis of it?
You know, that's where you can get into a judge's personal language that he prefers. I mean, you know, you've got things that are, you know, clearly going to be ballot fraud and not, but, you know, a judge can just come out there and say, well, you know, there is clear evidence of ballot fraud. I mean, these judges, I'm pretty sure in most cases they can get creative as long as the statute doesn't use language that says you have to say clear and convincing evidence. You have to say preponderance of the evidence. You know, if it doesn't say that, then the judges, you know, they can kind of go where they want.
Right, right. I mean, so basically, one of the arguments that Trump's lawyers could make is that ballot integrity is a fundamental duty for every single public servant who works in government across America. And if they haven't taken the due diligence to demonstrate that these are legitimate ballots and that they did them in a timely and correct manner, that basically, you know, the whole package from that district is in doubt, and then the courts could, you know, order that those things be thrown out, right, or amended. And then if what happens if, like, let's say the Secretary of State of Pennsylvania says, forget you, to the Supreme Court, I'm still going to send the vote counts that I want, and they're going against the Supreme Court, then are they in contempt of court, or how does that work?
Wow. You're getting into, you know, mostly uncharted territory.
Yeah, it's a constitutional crisis. I mean, it's real serious. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, you know, you've got the balance of powers, and the Supreme Court's supposed to be the last, you know, chance arbiter of these conflicts. And so, I mean, you would have to hold the state in contempt at that point. And,
right.
You know, does the Supreme Court have its own, you know, law enforcement agency? I mean, I'm pretty sure they do, but
well, for instance, when it was about segregation, which I think that issue is equal to this in severity, because it's such a fundamental right of suffrage here that's being endangered. The Supreme Court in the 1950s they placed orders. They said basically the full force of the government, including armed forces, had to be marshaled in order to desegregate Little Rock. So it seems to me like it's uncharted territory, but I think there is some precedent for a Supreme Court decision saying that basically, look, you know, somebody has to take possession of these ballots, of these stored ballots, so that somebody can look at them to figure out whether they were fake or not. You know, that's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, it sounds like you're right. I mean, but one thing I have to point out that I do not know off the top of my head, but we need to look into this maybe. Mm-hmm. You know, to what extent is counting these ballots state law, and in that sense, you can't even appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court because it's only a state law issue that the Supreme Court doesn't have jurisdiction over. I don't know if that is the case. But if it is, that's where they're going to hang their hat. The left's going to hang their hat.
Right. And I think that what we would have to do is we would have to pull out their favorite amendment of the Constitution, which is the 14th Amendment, which they have abused and stretched and misinterpreted in so many different ways. But this, to me, seems like a clear 14th Amendment issue. People in every state have to have the same right of suffrage. So that because the 14th Amendment was passed so that Mississippi can't pass a law saying Black people can't eat in restaurants. Right? Because they needed equal protection under the law, no matter what state you were in. So any federal protections have to be extended to people in all the states. And so it would seem to me like you would make some kind of appeal like that. I'm just speaking off the top of my head. I'm not even a lawyer. So I don't know. I got to go by what you say. But those seem like some of the arguments I could anticipate. Now, so ultimately, what we have is the secretaries of state in each state, and then some of them have election commissions or they have boards or whatever. They have to be basically take a look at all the districts and say, this is the count that I vouch for. This was the tally in my state, and then the state legislatures appoint electors. One nuclear option is to try to pressure the legislatures in those states to appoint electors that are going to nullify the vote from the Secretary of State. But I don't think that's going to work because I just don't think any elector is going to do that. I think it's going to be very hard to find that. So I think that's a pipe dream I would tell conservatives probably not to try to follow up on. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, not only is it going to be hard to find electors, but even with a Republican state legislature, such as here in Arizona,
right,
we barely control the state legislature.
Right.
But there are a couple hardcore rhinos on the Republican side, and they would
Right.
never go along with that.
Right. Okay. So here's what happens if some of these state cases go up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court issues a decision. That's the highest law of the land. It seems to me, because this is what happened in Bush versus Gore, that was dealing with the state of Florida specifically, remember? And it went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court basically said that they had to stop this. They couldn't amend anymore the returns after a certain date. So it froze the vote count. I think it was at one earlier point. And at that point, Bush was leading in the ballot count. And I remember the term that they used was safe harbor was the term. I forgot what the term was in Bush versus Gore, but it was the whole idea that you're ultimately endangering the suffrage of the people in your state if you are delaying it so much and giving so many people access to constantly recount and change the vote tallies that you're opening it up to the possibility of fraud or of an improper count. And so ultimately timeliness matters. That's what I do remember from Bush versus Gore, that the principle of election integrity is such that you cannot take weeks and weeks and weeks to do a count that really you can reasonably do the same day. And I think that would be one of the arguments that I would make before the Supreme Court for all these states. I mean, there is no reason that people cannot have a vote tally done the night of the election. So if we can go back to election night, were you up and watching all the returns as they came in, Rachel?
Oh, yes. I was up till, I think, 2:30 a.m. when they finally said, okay, we're not going to have any more numbers until tomorrow.
Right. I remember because I was live casting with somebody from France. We were doing a Francophone broadcast, and we were watching all of the returns as they came in. And like millions of people, I was watching, and we saw how the returns kept on getting updated in state after state, but specifically in the swing states that Trump needed to win, they all of a sudden stopped, and there was no change in the vote count. And then the vote count came in this huge big chunk at 4 o'clock in the morning Eastern Standard Time when everybody was asleep. So that's an example of why timeliness with the vote count matters. It's important because every hour past the closing of polls, when you have these millions and millions of ballots in boxes, that hour comes with a hazard because it's very difficult to maintain the security of the ballots for that long. And so every hour that it goes on, you increase the chance that somebody can tamper with the ballots, especially in a case like this, where we printed millions upon millions of unnecessary ballots because of the mail-in thing and because everybody was encouraging people to vote by absentee ballot. And then, of course, there's the provisional ballots. That's in California. I've always seen how the provisional ballots were a weak spot in election security. So it seems to me that you could make the case legally, and everybody saw it. Everyone had the evidence right in front of their eyes that there was enough suspicion in the timing of the vote tallies. And given where we are as a country with our technology, we have the most advanced digital technology in the world. We have the brightest people in STEM technology. There is no reason that you cannot count votes by the night of the election night. And one of the things that people constantly hear, you probably have heard this time and again, every time we're waiting on a stressful election, they always say, well, the last batch that's coming in is coming in from a Democrat stronghold. Have you noticed that? It's always like they say it's because it's a big city with a lot of minorities and they take a long time to count. Why do we ever accept that? Have you ever asked yourself that? Why did we ever, that should have never passed the laugh test. If you're in a huge district in an urban center that's centralized, you have people who can count the ballots. We have machines that can count the ballots. Put them in the machine, count the ballots, tell us what the count was. What is the rationale for saying that Democrat strongholds it can't finish the count by the end of the night? I never understood the reasoning behind this.
Well, here in Arizona, I was a Maricopa County election attorney in 2005, and I can tell you for years, it's the rural counties that are the last ones to turn in the ballots because they're slow and, their technology is slow or whatever. Mm-hmm. So that's just a flat out lie about the big cities, being the ones to come in last. And, like you said about Florida was able to get all of their ballots in on election night. And Florida is a humongous state with
right.
huge cities and, one of the biggest states in the nation. So if they can get all their ballots in on that night, there's no reason why all these other states can't. And I want to make one other point. I have a good friend in Kenya, and he's been telling me all day today about the similarities between his 2007 presidential election there and then his 2017 presidential election there. Because they both were rife with ballot fraud, the same type we've had here. And in 2007, the anti-corruption candidate challenger went into that election night. He was ahead by 1 million votes. And then suddenly, in the middle of the night, all the power went out everywhere.
Right.
3 to 4 hours later, guess what? The incumbent was ahead. And the United States went in and they did election polls there, and they found that the anti-corruption challenger was winning by 6 points. That is outside the margin of error. So we now have third world country election corruption in our country, and when the Democrats say that it's not being done, we've got evidence. They're just copying the Kenyans.
Right. No, but this is the thing that there are so many things that I wish conservatives who had media platform access would have stated in the debate about election integrity going into this election. Rachel gets some platform. I get a tiny little bit, but I wish, put me on CNN so I can explain these things. It's too bad that the people don't make these arguments. When they say there's no evidence of ballot fraud, or it's very, very rare, the first thing you can say to them is, don't get into a debate about America. Say, Americans are human beings. We're not different from the rest of the world. And election fraud is such a common problem all over the world that the United Nations specializes in sending observers. So that is evidence right there that, yes, human beings do. They take advantage of flaws in a system in order to try to steal elections. People do this. I know of one Latin American country where you have to put your thumbprint on your ballot in order to prove that it's you so that you can vote. And gangs would go down and track down people who had the ink on their thumb, because if they thought that they were voting for the other side, they would harass them and threaten them and intimidate them. So there's all kinds of voter intimidation. I remember in the Philippines in 1985, they caught on tape, they were trying to buy votes. So they would pay people when they could show that they could prove that they had cast a ballot for Nen Marcos. And so they stole millions of votes from Corazon Aquino. Sometimes there are ploys or tricks like that don't leave behind a paper trail that's so clear. Because if you're buying votes, there's still going to be a ballot with the person's signature on it. And, if you go to the person and say, did you vote? You're going to say, yeah, but it's still illegal to pay people to vote for a candidate. So there's all kinds of election meddling and election fraud that occur. And it is a lie that there's no evidence of it. It happens all the time. Yeah.
And did you hear that UN election observation team was not allowed to go in and observe? I think it was in Philadelphia. Is that crazy or what?
I didn't even know about this. I'm missing some of the news. The United Nations sent an election observer into Philadelphia.
It's it's one connected with the United Nations. That's
Oh my
like, you know,
gosh.
the #1 international poll watching group, and
Yeah.
they weren't even allowed in.
Yeah.
And you know, even with all the voter corruption, the ballot fraud that goes on that you can't prove, what scares me is there is so much we can prove, but I don't know if the courts are going to give us justice. Like, the one that's been freaking me out all day is the fact that you have about as many people over age 90 registered to vote this year, okay, in 2020, then you had people over age 90 registered to vote from 2008 until 2019.
Oh, so basically, there was a large number of people in that age group that were registered this year.
It's insane. That's like,
Yeah.
you know, 11 times, 12 times the amount of people registered to vote over age 90 this year than did in all those years.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, go on. Yeah, it's scary.
What you can prove that actually is voter fraud, because I'm sure you go and track down all those people over 90, you're not going to get every single one of them to say, "Oh yeah, I voted for Biden," because a lot of them are dead.
Yeah, no, I know. I think the thing about it is that here's how we've gotten to this point. This trick works. The Democrats have done it again and again and again. I'll give you a perfect example. 2017, Roy Moore was running against Doug Jones in that special election to take Jeff Sessions' seat in Alabama. Do you remember this? I watched the returns that night. Roy Moore was ahead by 10 points until the very last batch of votes came in. Again, they said it was from a heavily African-American district that was Democratic. All of the votes that came in the last batch were for Doug Jones, and that put him over past the point where a recount was automatic. And then Roy Moore said he wanted a recount, and then there was all this pressure from conservatives who said, you know, don't drag this out, don't embarrass us more. And so they backed down. Every time conservatives do this, every time they let the Democrats get away with this, they get us deeper and deeper into the hole, because Democrats, they can't help themselves after a certain point. They know that this works. They know they can get away with it. They have all of the arguments down. They know that everyone in the press will just print their press releases as if it's fact, right? And then so we saw it in 2018 in California. There were several different races where the returns came in on election night, and then within 2 weeks, they had discovered all these ballots and it had changed. This happened with Al Franken's seat in Minnesota. It happens a lot. Okay, so it is a lie that we've never had any evidence of voter fraud. Circumstantial evidence is evidence. Okay, that's important, right?
Yeah, and I get irritated with all the people saying there is no proven voter fraud. Well, you know what? As a former prosecutor and the former elections attorney, there are multiple definitions of the word fraud. Okay,
right.
We all know Hillary Clinton committed fraud, but just because she hasn't been prosecuted for it doesn't mean she's innocent. And so, when we have all these examples of fraud, and they haven't been prosecuted yet, all it means is, you know what, they haven't been tried in a court of law yet, and they haven't been, sentenced to prison, okay?
Right.
That's what they mean. But it doesn't mean they haven't committed it.
Right. And we saw what happened in Portland, Oregon, and in other districts this summer, where there were district attorneys who, for political and ideological reasons, they just chose not to prosecute things. This happened to me in California when I had very clear evidence of racial discrimination. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of California, but because I was conservative, they just wouldn't take the case up. I had all the facts and figures to show that there was a racial differential. This happens too. If people just refuse to prosecute it, then people can cry all the way till the cows come home that there's no proof, or there's no proven, or there's no convictions. And there have been convictions. People have gone to jail. Nativo Lopez, look him up. He was in California in 2007, 2008. I think he had 800 ballots that were fraudulent, and he went to jail of it. It's a complete lie that there's no proof. This has happened over and over and over again, and Republicans have talked about it over and over again. Democrats always get into this jaded attitude about it, like, the Republicans are talking about that again. And the Democrats try to deflect it with these discussions of voter suppression, which is much more vague. It's like, there's not enough ballots printed in one district, or people have to wait in line a long time, etc. That's not nearly as deliberate or as harmful as printing up fake ballots or printing up lots of provisional ballots and then keeping them stored away until you find out, as you're watching the news, the lead, the margin from the leading candidate to the next candidate, so you know how many votes you have to manufacture to make up the difference. There should never be anywhere in America a polling location that has closed where there are poll workers who have the voter lists in front of them and they're watching the news on the TV and they're not expected to turn in their vote count. Because what that means is they're watching Fox and CNN and MSNBC, and they say, oh, wow, he's leading by 1,200 votes. Let me go through the voter roll. Who didn't vote? Who's registered? And they fill out their votes and their ballots and they put them in. And they've done this on such a massive scale in 2020 that they just assume that we're all going to be too lazy and too scared to push and push and push to uncover it. But the thing that we have to do now, okay, so Rachel and I have talked a lot about the legal remedies. That's for Trump and his team to work on. I think that he has to push this all the way to the Supreme Court. He's got to get some kind of decisions, hopefully from the Supreme Court, that are based on election integrity. I think the clause to go with is the 14th and the 15th Amendment about suffrage and equal protection under the law, because you're disenfranchising people if you are having such sloppy security and you're taking so long to count the votes that you're essentially leaving the doors wide open to fraud, and that nullifies legitimate people's suffrage. So I think that would be the key. Now, constitutionally, what happens is the electors are chosen by the states and they have to present the vote counts to Congress. According to the Constitution, the president of the Senate, which is the vice president of the United States, in this case, Mike Pence, he presides over a joint session of Congress where they agree to accept the votes. So here's the good news. If we can get the GOP on track and keep the Republicans from squirming and getting scared, Mike Pence is going to be presiding over that joint session of Congress. And the Congress has the right to say there are too many questions over this state's electoral count. We don't accept them. And then what ends up happening is if neither of the candidates gets 270 votes, it goes to the House of Representatives and it's voted in there. Now that's scary because the Democrats control the House and Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House. But here's the good news. According to the Constitution, every state gets one vote, and there are more GOP delegations than there are Democrat delegations. That's the bright silver lining in all of this, is that the Constitution was set up with these checks and balances. None of this is improper or illegal or inappropriate or unethical. This is the way that the framers of the Constitution set up our system, because they knew that in any democratic republic or in any kind of place where you have sovereignty by the people and people are voting, who counts the votes is always going to be the Achilles heel. So they knew that, and that's why they put those provisions in there so that there were checks and balances. So if you have a crooked, rotten state like, California, where I think the election security is a complete disaster, right? You have the right as a Congress to say, look, we have sent inquiries, we've asked to see your voter rolls, and we've sent investigators. You refuse it to show us. You're not operating with transparency. We cannot vouch for the authenticity of this vote count, and we don't accept your votes. And that's kind of the nuclear option, but it is there. It's constitutional. And the question for all of us as people who want to safeguard our republic is we have got to mobilize, because if we are going to pull that nuclear option to stop this, and I think that's the only thing that's open to us is that nuclear option, we have got to have such massive public pressure on the Republicans in Congress that they are scared that their careers are going to end if they let the Democrats steal this vote. So people, you've got to get out there. I don't have a huge platform, but I'm broadcasting this right now. Anybody, if you have 20 people who are on your social media feed, you've got to just keep on putting things out there, educate people so that they understand how this process works and what we can do to make a difference. We can't really influence the Supreme Court or the legal case. That's fair to say, Rachel. I mean, that's just something that we don't, as citizens, we can't control that, but we can put pressure on the Republicans because the Constitution gives them the power to be able to make an informed decision about the electoral vote count. And if it goes to the House of Representatives, and if the Republicans in the House are still, that they have any spine left, we have that means of being able to give this election to the correct person, which is Donald Trump. What do you think?
It sounds great, but let me double check your procedure. Are you sure the House Democrats can't put a wrinkle in that?
Well, I think that it's possible that procedurally Nancy Pelosi can. I don't think she can block it, though, because I think it's a joint session of Congress, and the person presiding over it is the president of the Senate. I'm going to find let me find the U.S. Constitution section on here and see if we can. Okay, it's in Article 2. Okay, let me check the Article 2. Okay. Okay, here's what I'm going to read this just verbatim. The electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for two persons, of whom one at least shall not be an inhabitant of the same state as themselves, and they shall make a list of all the persons voted for and the number of votes for each, which list they shall sign and certify and transmit sealed to the seat of the government of the United States, directed to the president of the Senate. So basically, let's break this down. The electors in each state, they have to give a list of the vote count, and they send that to the president of the Senate, which is the vice president, which is Mike Pence. The president of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and then the votes shall be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes shall be the president, if such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed, and if there be more than one who have such a majority, then have an equal number of votes, then the House of Representatives shall immediately choose by ballot one of them for president. And if no person has a majority, then from the five highest on the list, the House shall in like manner choose the president. But in choosing the president, the votes shall be taken by states, the representation from each state having one. There is the word there, Rachel, which might protect us immediately. Because that matters, doesn't it? It says they shall immediately. So I don't think that Nancy Pelosi can delay it at that point, can she?
No, that's a tough one. I mean, off the top of my head, it doesn't look like there's any easy tricks for her to, get around that. Yeah.
Well, I think the main thing is the Constitution gives the people in Congress, and especially the vice president, leeway to intervene to stop this. Because at some point, and I think it happens in December, that the electors send the lists under seal to Washington, and then usually in January they have that joint session of Congress where they read the electors and they certify the votes. Because of the fact that the joint session of Congress has the right to certify the vote, that's the point where they could intervene. But it would depend upon the Republicans being able to stop it. And being able to act on this. Now, it will be a lot. They'll have a lot more backup if the Supreme Court has ruled that the vote counts are improper, and that would be for the Supreme Court to decide. That would strengthen their case. But we as citizens, we absolutely can keep the pressure on the Republicans in Congress to try to get them to act on this. I don't know. Have you seen much about Vice President Pence's attitude about all of this?
No, he's been really quiet.
Yeah, I haven't heard from him at all. Have you?
No.
Yeah. Well,
that's odd.
Yeah.
I think he would be out there trying to rally the troops.
Yeah. I think it's important that we just don't get discouraged because, right now, we have to remember that 70 million people voted for Trump after 4 years of being told by our church leaders and by the people on TV and by the newspapers and by big tech and by everyone around us that, he was the most evil person on earth. 70 million people went out and voted for him. He did well in minority groups. He did well among women. So, all these charges that he was a bigot have fallen flat. So, we have each other's backs. There are a lot of us. Where there's not just a few of us. We're not a fringe. Okay, I don't think, Rachel, it's fair to say 70 million people is not a lunatic fringe, right?
They're just like supremacists.
they're just like the KKK. There's like 5 of them in a trailer somewhere. No, there's a bunch of us, and so I think we got to stand strong on this. Now, Rachel, what should people fear legally if they try to gather and organize to support the president, and then Biden ends up assuming control of the White House? Are we going to be blacklisted? Are we going to be, what can they do to us? Can they construe any of this as a crime, the way that Twitter calls it all, like, spreading disinformation or whatever? I mean, legally, can they do that?
Oh, boy. Well, you know about the list they've already started creating about anyone associated with Trump, right?
Right, yeah. All Trump supporters. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez already put that on Twitter, that they're going to compile a list. This is why you have to fight this now, because once they get into office, there's going to be no, they're not going to be nicer to you if you were nicer to them now. They're not going to be patient with you if you were patient with them. Once they get into office, they're going to proceed ruthlessly. And anybody who was tied to Trump, even if at this hour you get scared and you go along with what they're saying, you're still going to suffer the same fate as the rest of us. So we've got to stand up. Now, one little announcement before I let you go, Rachel. Thank you so much for joining. Tomorrow, this is what the news that I've been getting off the wire. Saturday, November 7th, it does not matter what state you are in. In all 50 states, they are calling for rallies in the state capital. So Texas, here it's Austin. And I think that the capital of Arizona is Phoenix, right?
Yeah.
Do you live in Phoenix?
I do. I'm usually a couple miles away from the rioters.
Oh, really? So what's going on? Can you tell us what's going on in Arizona? What's your reading of the situation in Arizona? Is Trump going to lose Arizona or what? What do you think?
The last couple rounds of ballots that came in were not good. He needed to have gotten about 57% of the votes coming in, and we have definitely seen a drop in at least one of the big batches of ballots from Maricopa County. It was only 51% or something. So at this point, it's not really looking good. And I am somebody who is really honest with you. And
right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think it was right that Fox called Arizona early, but it does look to me like that one he may not have won. I mean, you got to admit some of them. I think Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, to me, it seems pretty convincing that he probably won those states. But
I will say this: in Arizona,
mm-hmm.
I still think there's a lot of fraud going on.
Yeah,
because everything else in the state shows. We kept the state legislature. We didn't think we were going to keep the state legislature. David Schweiker, won re-election. We were all, terrified of that race. The county recorder's race itself is too close to even call right now. And that guy's always in the news. So, you would have thought it would have been a TV re-election for him. So all the signs are there that the Republicans did well in Arizona. So nobody's buying this. That this was actually a non-fraud vote against Trump.
Yeah, because remember that it could be that there are ballots there that are marked, but that person doesn't exist, or somebody else stole their ballot, or there was a stack of them in the post office, or there could be 3 ballots with the same person. Unless we actually have enough time and we have massive power of computer programs and can go back and double check all these names, which I think we should do, quite honestly, because this is this is getting out of control. All right, well, thank you so much. I will broadcast again. For right now, this was my first English broadcast of the Big Brown Gadfly after the election. And just stay strong, folks. Stay strong. And let's see what we can do to support our guy. Thank you.